Now Tuesday once again. Today we're discussing the hot button issue of assisted suicide, specifically one interesting case out of Cleveland, Ohio, where an insanity plea is now on the table. Attorney David Aylor, the leader in litigation, the sovereign of settlements, here to tell us all about it. Counselor, it seems like it's a disturbing trend. More and more people trying to take their own life, suicide by cop. It's a thing that's happening more and more in society. But tell us about that case out of Cleveland.
Yeah, this is a little bit of a different situation because this lady was in the hospital and she was in a grave condition. And ultimately, what is alleged to have occurred is her husband came and took her life there in the hospital. Now, of course, he was arrested for murder and is on trial this week. But from what everything that's come through the readings is essentially he did this not out of any sort of insurance gain or revenge. It was simply because he didn't want his wife to suffer anymore, and they had an agreement that neither one would let the other do that.
A lot of people say it's the humane thing to do, you know, and you get into these situations, obviously there's a lot of gray area, and that was highlighted by the Dr. Kevorkian cases, the assisted suicide cases back in the 90s. Where does that law stand right now, and is it something that you need to get into a will to make sure that your specific orders are followed?
Well, that's a good question. Well, obviously Dr. Kevorkian, Dr. Death as they called him, he really brought this to the forefront as a legal issue, and ultimately what came down from the Supreme Court related to some cases he was involved in as well as others is that it is completely illegal to assist someone with a suicide. That is not their civil right to have the assistance of another individual when it comes to actually the act in and of itself. However, there are several states that have a Death with Dignity Act out west actually where you can get prescribed a certain cocktail of pills after going through a battery of tests and having a terminal illness and actually, you know, take those pills yourself without the assistance of another individual. Ultimately, though, the best thing anybody can do, particularly like in this situation that occurred in Cleveland, which is such a tragedy on both sides, is get a living will. Obviously, we've talked about wills in general here lately, and you see that's something that a lot of people struggle to actually go through with, even though it's a simple process. Beyond that is a living will, and essentially with a living will, what that does is that enables the other members of your family, your loved ones, the executive of your estate, if and when you're unfortunately in the situation where you are considered in a vegetative state, then they can make the determination whether or not any further treatment should go forward or they should ultimately let you pass.
Yeah, we've heard about those DNRs, those do not resuscitate orders, but from a legal standpoint, is there something you can put even in a living will, counselor, that says that my wife is in this condition and that I, as this case in Cleveland said, gets to, so to speak, pull the plug?
Well, essentially what you can't do, and that's the issue in this case, and that's why this person is charged, you can't play God, you can't play doctor. Similar to vigilante justice, you can't play cop. And ultimately, while it is a somewhat sympathetic or apathetic thing that you can understand that this person did for his wife, it's still illegal because that's the job of the medical professionals if and when it comes to that point to determine that. And then they can obviously go back to the living will, which would be in place for this lady or any other person. But again, it's not a decision, even if that may be what that person would want, and you know that in your heart of hearts, you have to go through the legal channels. Otherwise, you end up having a situation where people are taking it in their own hands, and obviously they're not going to allow that.
Let's talk about where this goes from here, because obviously if this does go to a jury trial, do you think that a jury is going to convict someone of murder for I guess, you know, taking their suffering away from their significant other?
You know, that's an interesting question. They started the trial this week, and what they're going to be looking at is, you know, the defense that's put up. The defense that's put up is going to be an insanity plea, separate completely from anything to do with, you know, the suffering issue. And this insanity plea based upon the situation as a whole. This person lost his mind and didn't know the difference between right or wrong. And that's a tough argument to make, particularly because it seems like he actually knew what he was doing and had an objective. However, there are times when a jury will look at a case, and I've been involved in some myself, and they will ignore the law because, let's face it, the law, unless the insanity plea comes through, is that he in fact murdered this person regardless of the circumstances of that murder and who that person was. However, juries will take some situations and look at it from more just a pure standpoint and throw out any kind of legal theory and maybe find him not guilty.
It's going to be an interesting case for sure. We'll be following for it. Thank you so much, Counselor David Aylor. We do appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
Ask Ellen anything. That's up next.